Good evening to one and all. I welcome you all for webinar on heritage management of historic cities, case study of Ahmedabad and Jaipur. I'll start with a quote by Steve Berry. A concerted effort to preserve our heritage is a vital link to our cultural, educational, aesthetic, inspirational, and economic legacies. All of the things that quite literally makes us who we are. Heritage management is the practice of preserving, protecting, and promoting heritage in its various forms. The broadening of properties under heritage umbrella has dramatically increased the number of places and landscapes that require preservation, stewardship, and promotion. When the entire world is fighting against the global issue of the COVID-19 pandemic, our action to deal with our heritage too needs reconsideration. In the wake of growing coronavirus outbreak, it is significant to know and understand how to incorporate post-pandemic planning for urban heritage. School of Architecture and Design, Manipal University Jaipur has proposed a webinar on heritage management of historic cities in India, a case study of Jaipur and Ahmedabad, to deliberate upon the post-pandemic ways and solutions to manage our urban heritage. The coronavirus crisis shall dramatically reshape cities around the world, not to exclude the heritage precincts and settlements within the larger urban limits. India is one such nation that has already been facing challenges with urban heritage management. Our speakers shall share their experiences and throw light on the way forward for dealing with current and future situations through case examples of the World Heritage cities of Ahmedabad and Jaipur. It's my pleasure to introduce the speakers. Dr. Shikha Jain. Dr. Shikha Jain's wide experience in cultural heritage ranges from representations at International World Heritage UNESCO meetings to conservation planning, implementation of more than 50 conservation World Heritage and museum projects across India and overseas, largely realized through her organization Drona. As an international expert, she has advised the National Heritage Board, Singapore, TRIM Malaysia, SGTS, UAE, UNESCO, Jakarta Office, Indonesia, UNESCO New Delhi Office, and the Department of Archaeology, Myanmar. She represented India as a cultural heritage expert in UNESCO World Heritage Committee from 2011 to 2015 and guided all nomination dossiers for India during this period. She received HUDCO Heritage Awards for 2 Jaipur urban conservation projects, Jaipur Bazaars and Ghat Ki Guni, in 2013, that are also documented as best practice projects by the Ministry of Urban Development. The Jaipur Heritage Management Plan was also published as best practice for heritage conservation by NIUA in 2015. Her organization Drona was instrumental in the inscription of all cultural World Heritage sites in Rajasthan. Jantar Mantar in 2010, 6 hill forts of Rajasthan, including Amer in 2013, Jaipur as UNESCO City of Crafts and Folk Arts in 2015, and Jaipur as a World Heritage City in 2019. Welcome, Dr. Shikha. Now I'll introduce architect Ashish Tambadia. Architect Ashish Tambadia started his career from IIT Roorkee in 2002 as project associate, and from 2005 to 2006, he worked with Intact New Delhi for various conservation projects. Through his private practice, he has worked on varied range of conservation projects, including fortification walls of 10th and 18th century phases at Hinglesgarh, a WMF funded project with Government of MP, fortification of Ahmedabad city, gates of Rajkot, reports on Junagadh, Lakhpat and Diu forts, condition appraisal for Rani Ki Vav, Patan, Lonar, group of monuments, Louis Kahn Plaza, IIMA, and city-level projects like Heritage Tourism Plan for Sidhpur. Heritage Walk route upgradation, Ahmedabad, As a conservation architect, he has completed projects with IIM Ahmedabad, ASI, Tourism Corporation of Gujarat Limited, Municipal Corporations of Ahmedabad and Rajkot, Government of Andhra Pradesh, Self-Employed Women Association and others. Architect Ashish is affiliated with institutions like ICOMOS, COA, INTAC, GICEA, Yogada Satsang Society of India. He is an advisory panel member to Vernacular Heritage Publication, Atulya Varso. He coordinates the National Scientific Committee of Fortifications, NSC Fort at India, ICOMOS, and have initiated multilingual glossary of fortification heritage from various regions of India. Currently, he is heading Ahmedabad World Heritage Cities Trust, which works mainly for urban conservation in historic walled city, its buildings, sites, and living heritage. The trust has started several initiatives of community involvement and capacity building, including UNESCO, WH volunteers. We have also present with us our Dean, Faculty of Design, Professor Dr. Anuradha. I welcome you, Architect Ashish and Dr. Anuradha. Now I request Architect Ashish Timbadia to start his presentation on Ahmedabad city.
Thank you very much, Dr. Madhura. I would like to straight ahead come to the presentation. And before that, let me just discuss the way we see heritage when there are monuments or sites which are well protected and it has its own boundaries. So the heritage which has got its own context very well defined as one single heritage site has a very different kind of context and situations of crisis in such situations like pandemic. Most of the monuments per se, the protected monuments, are right now not accessible to public. But beyond that, there is not much crisis. Here we are comparing the two living cities, and which has got a very, very different kind of perspective of heritage, which has got life in it, which has got day-to-day activities happening. So I would like to start with the introduction of Ahmedabad. Of course, Ahmedabad, since last 600 years, known as Ahmedabad, founded by the Ahmed Shah. It has been a city of heritage and sustainable growth. And the present day, of course, the old city, the historic city of Ahmedabad, which is now prescribed as the World Heritage Site. The boundaries of the old city itself are considered as World Heritage Site, and which confines to the walled part of the town. These are some of the images from the local daily newspapers in how the city is reacting. And most of the places that you see are like shut down, but very dense and affected severely also in terms of pandemic. The city has its own nature in which it responds. In history, this has happened in the Spanish flu, when the city also responded. And that time, this core city was the city, more or less. There were only few mills and smaller settlements outside. But right now, the context is very different. In this next slide, I would like to go back to history. What were these urban centers and how did Ahmedabad start? Ahmedabad has its some predecessors, like the first image that you see on the top, on the right hand, is Vadnagar, which has got, yesterday itself there was a new discovery, which has got Buddhist relics and Buddhist archaeological findings from the city. It's a living city again. Second one is Patan, where the World Heritage Site of Rani Ki Vav is there, was the capital of the state of Gujarat, or at that time the Malwa region. But this side, the Gujarat side of Malwa region. So this Gurjar Desh capital was Patan city, and next was the city of Ahmedabad. City of Ahmedabad was basically a shift from Patan to Ahmedabad. So Ahmed Shah was initially ruling from Patan, and then he decided that he wanted to establish a new capital city, which would be better located further down south, so that it can be connected further to the coastal trade routes and the business routes which were coming from the south of India and going towards the north to Delhi. because of course his connections with the Delhi Sultanate would be one of the significant place where he would make sure that this new capital city, which would enable him to rule over this entire kingdom of Gujarat better. You can see the urban scape and the natural topography all the three cities respond to. Ahmedabad has got a river as its direct edge. Other two cities were more or less on the catchments locally, and the river was flowing a little far from the city itself. Now, when we started inscribing the city, or when we say the 600 years old, the Ahmedabad already had two previous settlements recorded in archaeological findings and history text. One was Ashawal, the image on your right, bottom right, and the second one is Karnavati. Ashawal was a small traditional settlement, and so there are certain interesting findings. There are, in people's mind, in the memories of people, the Ashawal city still lives today. Karnavati was one of the kings ruling from Patan, King Karnadev, who established a fortress here. So this was a fortified town. So Ahmed Shah then decided to build a larger megapolis city between these two ancient settlements which were there or pre-existed before the walled city was established. Now, why I'm explaining this is Ahmedabad's 15th century development actually was a world class. There were smaller settlements, and there is history dating back to as early as 5th, 6th century. But this is the most important part in the heritage of Ahmedabad. So this was right on the bank, and the fortification was built in three phases. The first one was a small fortified quarter called Bhadra. The name Bhadra itself was adapted from the Bhadra citadel of Patan, which was the Hindu citadel or the palace of the king of Patan. But when Ahmed Shah decided to shift the capital, he was quite conscious in making choices. He wanted this idea of Patan to shift to Ahmedabad instead of just making a new city, so that all the communities, all the people, businessmen, everybody who is coming along to this new city feels at home. So that idea of adaptation came from Patan. And then the outer fortification, as we see today, the bow-shaped arch formation of the fortification was his grandson's, majorly his grandson's work, which was Muhammad III. But if you look at the topographical image that we have on the right-hand side, it's basically on the terrain and slowly, gently sloping towards the river. So there is a nice topography based on which the idea of city was founded. So 1411 is recorded to be the foundation of Ahmedabad, and this idea in 1411, in the early 15th century, this was one of the largest urban scape with Islamic and Hindu architecture together. So that was the highlight, and that forms the very important part of the World Heritage nomination dossier as well. Even today, if we look at the outstanding values of heritage, comparing to rest of the world, the 15th century's development is one of the prime most. But there are more which were later added, and which includes Mughals. So Mughals, Akbar ruled from Ahmedabad as a Subedar, then Shah Jahan, and even Aurangzeb. All these three big Mughal emperors had spent their good time. Even Jahangir spent some time at Ahmedabad. So Mughal rule has its own imprints on the city. Marathas were ruling for quite a time, and then the British rule. And we have included everything. As I said, this was one nomination which was accepted by UNESCO in 2017, which has got multiple layers of history and in living nature. So the last part of the nomination includes the settlement pattern, the lifestyle of the city itself, which has got the built heritage of timber architecture, the wooden havelis and buildings, and also the lifestyle in the city, which makes the city a very unique case comparing to the previous World Heritage sites of India. Of course, now we have Jaipur as well. But that time this was so. This is the present status of Ahmedabad, as you can see. The central area, which is the walled city area, which is now defined as the World Heritage City, about 5.4 square kilometer, which was a fortified town, and it started expanding. The 2008 image gives us 466 square kilometer, and the new master plan envisages is to go beyond 550 square kilometers. So another 100 square kilometers is expected to be the urban areas of Ahmedabad in the new master plan. In terms of current population, the walled city houses little less than 5 lakhs, or maybe touching 5 lakhs if we consider the next census. And so, as I said earlier, the walled city was the city of Ahmedabad, and now this old city is one part of the city, and which makes the management of heritage as well as the urban management a bit more complicated. Coming back to the main values which are to be conserved, one is the art and architecture. So the UNESCO asks you to define your outstanding values, and the architecture which was developed by the early Islamic rulers who came here brought not only the city from Patan to Ahmedabad, but also brought along with them the masons, the materials, the technology of construction. So most of the images that you see here are Hindu-Muslim architecture, or Indo-Islamic as the British scholars would have defined that. So this is the blend of two cultures which was very, very vibrant. And to adapt to this blend, even the rulers of Ahmedabad, starting from Ahmed Shah himself, they were very open to let the craftsman choose his own freedom and creativity, and made amendments to the stricter norms of Islamic architecture. So this is an Islamic city having its own version, comparing those to the global Islamic architecture of that time. And this was a landmark achievement. This is what was learned by Akbar when he was here as a Subedar, and then practiced in the architecture of Fatehpur Sikri and in Delhi and Agra, so on. So this is one of the learning exercises which probably I assume that have inspired a lot in following centuries of the Indian architecture, and especially the Mughal Indian architecture. So this was one of the important aspects. The second important aspect is the settlement pattern. The city which was founded in 15th century, the earlier images that I have shown, the fortified city, it still holds that kind of city footprints and the life within it. Of course, updated and with multiple layers on the city, it changes. But these are the settlement patterns which have sustained for 6 centuries, and all the traditional knowledge, all the memories of the city which are in place even today. So these are the two values: value of the architecture, of the uniqueness of the master architecture that was developed in the 15th century and 16th century. And the second part is the continuity of this traditional city or traditional settlement pattern. So this is what we have in terms of heritage. So of course one can imagine that there is a range, and instead of just looking at the UNESCO defined values, I would actually rather start by saying that it started with the initiatives of the dialogues of people of Ahmedabad itself. Ahmedabad is not really so much a tourism city per se. So heritage tourism is very small segment which is playing a role in the growth of Ahmedabad. But way back in 1996, we started the idea of walks and talks. So to celebrate the provincial architecture that we had in the city, but also to understand the idea of our own heritage. And this walks provided to be very interesting tool of this. So the first one that you see is the Heritage Walk of Ahmedabad, which is practiced 365 days every day. The second one is about the businesses and the evening walk, so where you can enjoy the city and its lifestyle. And the third one is about the Kranti Yatra. So what was the contribution of the walled city in the fight of freedom fight from 19th and 20th century. So these were the initial ideas of heritage. This in the minds of people. I'm not talking about the protected monuments here. So this was the idea, and in 1996 we started talking about this. But before that, I would like to mention that in 1833, the town fortification walls were decaying because there were so many warfares, Marathas, Britishers. Before Marathas, also Mughals and Marathas had a war here. So fortification walls were decaying. And the city came together, the people from the city came together. They said, we will collect tax on our own businesses and we will restore these walls. So the idea of restoration, we have a record in 1833 that the first committee was set up, and slowly this committee started looking after the city's life and was formed into the municipality. Here the role of local government or local body of municipal corporation becomes very important. So, and its roots are based in heritage itself. The first formal identification to the city level heritage, this is not about monuments again I'm saying, is 1961 when we have a census with so many numbers of wooden heritage buildings which has got wood craftsmanship listed in the Government of India census. So that was the first recognition that we have. And then in 1988, 89, we have the Ford Foundation study on the cultural heritage of Ahmedabad, which basically talks about the built heritage, both monuments and the local vernacular buildings. In 1996, as I said, with the idea of walks and talks, so deliberations used to happen between people and authority. The heritage walks and heritage cell started. Heritage cell used to do a lot of awareness building and public gathering on these issues. So after that, the French government came in and it started escalating up as a very important aspect of the urban development of Ahmedabad. In 2002, we had the new government guidelines or the development control regulations, which identified Walled City as a special zone, which will have a different kind of construction systems and construction regulations than the other rest of the part. In 2007, we introduced a very dedicated specific building bylaws, which made sure that the heritage of Ahmedabad or the Walled City does not get lost. These were the times when the urban transformation were at its peak. And most of the urban cores of the many cities in India started getting degraded. Here we had these regulations coming in. We have a tentative list, and I'll give you an outline. And in 2017, we were declared the World Heritage Site by UNESCO. So, as I mentioned, the two criteria 2, which is to exhibit an important interchange of human values. So, the Hindu-Islamic architecture that Ahmedabad has developed in 15th century is where the UNESCO had accepted the criteria for Ahmedabad as a qualifying World Heritage Site, and criteria number 5, which is the outstanding example of a traditional settlement. So these are the two criteria. We also applied with criteria 6. However, criteria 6 is not inscribed during the Committee of World Heritage by UNESCO. So inscribed property, as I said, is about 5 square kilometer, and it's buffer which has got the interface with the city, but the city, the core city itself is an entity. So we have here a lot of buildings and sites which are closely built. But the next one is more important, where we have so many monuments which are archaeologically protected monuments. So as you can see today, the inscribed property has as good as 28 monuments, almost covering 70% of the built fabric under the National Monument Authority Act regulations. So this gives us a little more freedom of management of built heritage in the walled city. We had the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation's Heritage Department active since 1996, as I mentioned. In 2017, we started thinking of another body which will look after the qualitative aspect of it. So there are administrative aspects from Heritage Department, and there are other aspects like the capacity building, the community engagement, and also the recommendations which were received from the global community of UNESCO. That's how the World Heritage City Trust was formed, and I started working with the trust. Earlier, I had worked for a couple of restoration projects, but the way we see the urban management today, it has got a very different approach, the Municipal Corporation of Ahmedabad. And these are some of the monuments We have about, as I mentioned, 28 nationally protected monuments. We have one state protected monument, and there are more than 2,400 plus locally listed heritage buildings, for which we have a specific regulation published in 2007. So this was the management aspect of it. And we also are looking at the buildings which are outside the walled city, which are more than 300 right now, and which are tentatively listed. So these are the heritage in terms of numbers, the built heritage, the tangible ones. Looking at the city's footprint, because this is the most important aspect in pandemic situations. The 1800 map, the canvas map, clearly identifies the city's footprint, which was more or less the same. But as you can see on the image on the right, which was the first surveyed map during the British India period, the early 20th century map. And if you compare that with the city today, more or less the city's footprints are the same in terms of buildings, in terms of lanes and bylanes, except for there are two main roads which were introduced. The city remains as such. It also gets the connectivity of the bus rapid transportation system. There is a peripheral road going outside, so there are transportation connectivities which are introduced, but the city's footprints were unaltered. And the next one is the map of the densely dotted heritage structures in the walled city, which are the tangible heritage which is listed. But as I said, when we inscribe the walled city as the property, it's not only about the listed buildings, it is also about the city itself and its footprint, which has a very, very important role to play in communal well-being and the quality of life aspect of the city. So this is the idea of one sector or a quarter called pole. This is a very famous term now. Most of you must be knowing about the poles of Ahmedabad. Every pole has got one entrance gate. There would be a common facility like a bird feeder, a well, an open well. It would be a temple or a mosque, depending on the community, or it can be a church as well. But there would be a community structure. There would be a community gathering space. But most importantly, the pole gates are the only connection between the main roads and the insides of the residential society. So these are the ideas of gated communities which were there. As you can see in this image, most of these are on the image on the right hand side top are the pole gates. So these are all gated community, and inside each gated community there would be about 50 to as large as 200 houses in the pole. And the front side of the lanes would be like this, with the bottom image on the left hand side with a lot of timber architecture in the front, and there would be a back lane which is more like a service lane, about 2 feet or 3 feet wide, called chini, which also gives a space for services and laying all the kind of infrastructure that is required. Most of the pole owners, the locals, would take the initiatives. These are not sultanate or provincial architecture, but these are bird feeders, the community wells. These are all donated and built for their own community, for their own neighborhood, by the people themselves. Look at the idea of self-sustainable neighborhoods, where they have their own buildings, but they also build their own common infrastructure by themselves. And they have a gated entrance which has got a top chamber for safety and security, which gives you the access, but also restricts the access for the unknowns in terms of attacks in the past. These were very important structures. Even the pandemic, this could be a very important feature. These are the fortification walls, and after restoration, there are certain comparison between the previous and the present condition of the fortification walls, which were not really as gigantic and large like very huge fortification. Maybe many of the places in hillsides. These were the forts on the plains. So very small, but very important part of the city, forming its outline. Ahmedabad Corporation also supports the heritage of private heritage. So there are restoration which are happening on the public heritage buildings, which are done and funded by the local body itself. There would be archaeological monuments which will be restored by the archaeological departments, whether it's a central government or a state government. And there'll be private buildings which are to be restored by the owner. But what Heritage Department and the Ahmedabad Corporation does is provide certain kind of assistance to this. This is very important. Since 2017 regulation, of course, I mean, these are all been updated and amended time to time. But this was the time when we actually rethought. So 2002 GDCR and 2007 amendment with the gazetted notification for listed heritage structures which are locally listed, which does not have a state protection, which does not have a central protection, but corporation's own listed heritage buildings. It encourages the retention. Even for the buildings which are not listed, if you look at the present building regulation guidelines, it very clearly states that to reconstruct anything on any plot, it's very, very difficult because there are stringent regulations. So you'll have to leave a lot of setbacks, and you will be only getting certain limited FSI. But if you have a building footprint which are going to retain, repair, restore as per the norms, you are entitled to utilize as much as you. Presently, these regulations actually compared what is there. If somebody wants to pull down a building which is a 3-story structure and builds a new construction, the regulation actually permits him to only go for 2-story building. This is, I'm talking figuratively. So the building regulation itself discourages new construction and encourages retention and maintenance. So if you maintain well, you are entitled to utilize as much as you have. But if you don't and demolish and reconstruct, you are not. So this is one very, very important step which was taken. And the recent building, the central or common development control regulation by this Gujarat state also identifies Ahmedabad walled city as a special case, and which defines this. It also defines and it also recommends the features like the central courtyard, the features like balconies, the projected balconies, chajjas which were there in the facades of the wooden structures. So there are features which are given acknowledgement and are encouraged. If it's a listed heritage building, there is also an incentive. So to restore and maintain those buildings and not get rid of them, which are the traditional heritage buildings, we also give financial incentive from the transferable development rights. And this is one of the samples of the transferable development rights given for the heritage categories for a number of buildings. This is just a screenshot. While talking about the quality of life in the walled city, as I mentioned, all the poles are self-sustaining units, which has got its own safety features, but it also has a lot of interesting ways in which the community responds to its basic day-to-day life, and which is very much inbuilt as a part of the heritage of Ahmedabad. So these are some of the drawings of walled city buildings, which has got a central courtyard, which has got projected front elevation, reducing the heat from the front side, because Ahmedabad is in one of the hot regions. And there are certain initiatives to make this kind of buildings and architecture sustained by listing and grading, by supporting the heritage restoration project, a conservation plan. Right now, we are working on an important heritage conservation plan for the walled city, along with the NIUA, the National Institute of Urban Affairs, to look at a development plan for the walled city itself. So we are also going to talk about its infrastructure, its transportation, and the building footprints that we were talking initially. So the first part of the homework that we have done, and now we have been working since last 1.5 years, and I'm sure after this pandemic situation we'll also add some more dimensions to this heritage conservation plan that we are working with the NIUA. We also did later on, we also did an intangible heritage diagnostic study, which included and which were very interesting discoveries like the silk weaving crafts, which was initiated in Ashawal, the first town of the city. There are very interesting kite maker communities living inside the walled city, which have now may not be geolocated inside the city, but it is one of the very important crafts for a large section of communities here. Wood carving, traditional construction and restoration, which are some of the traditional sectors, the intangible heritage sectors that we have started diagnosis right now. And the tourism and outreach, which is, as I said, is a very small segment right now, but we envisage to be one of the future. So that's it as from the case of Ahmedabad. Any queries, I'll be happy to address. The email address is mentioned here. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for that, Ashish Champatia. That was a fantastic presentation. I'll make an attempt to quickly summarize it. I think it was really good to hear about, it's a very comprehensive overview of, especially for the uninitiated into the history of heritage management of Ahmedabad, how you talked about how the city was, how the city was set up, and especially, how you drew attention to the 15th century development, which became, the foundation upon which, the urban heritage of Ahmedabad was established. You also talked about the intercultural aspect of the city, which was considered to be an important part of its heritage value, especially in terms of arts and aesthetics. I think you also touched upon settlement patterns that have been persistent and continuing, and we talked about two main values. I think you talked about the value of uniqueness and the continuity of traditions, which you pointed as sort of the main values that have been important in gaining Ahmedabad its World Heritage status. You also talked about the importance of heritage tourism, which is important, especially by getting people on ground and getting them to understand and value, what you're conserving. I think the coverage of the history of cities' governance structure, which is absolutely essential to successful execution of the different initiatives. I think that was actually really significant and spot on. You also talked about the management, the extent to which, how many, talked about the number of monuments and buildings of significance that are there in the cities, and also the guidelines. You touched upon the guidelines. So I think it was a really useful, a case study to kind of look at, especially. I think you start to appreciate the different stakeholders and how important it is to be in sync in terms of these different governance structures to really get things done. I think so. Ashish, I thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
It was a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Now I request Dr. Shikha for her presentation, and we will take question answer sessions after Dr. Shikha's presentation. Dr. Shikha, please.
Thank you, Dr. Madhura, for the introduction. I will start my presentation on Jaipur, which is really about the journey of Jaipur, towards heritage conservation and going with World Heritage, and of course now. Whether it is World Heritage or not, heritage for Jaipur is an essential aspect, that needs to be dealt with. Going back to how it looked in the 18th century, designed by one visionary person, Sir Y.J. Singh, you can look at how this archival image shows, what Jaipur looked like. It was probably, it's the only 18th century city in India which is designed with this kind of planning, with this wide streets that still continue to accommodate the traffic of today, 21st century, as a living heritage city. So you can see the contrast. And, when it comes to smart city, I just feel that, how you can get smarter than Sir Y.J. Singh himself, who designed this 200 years back. And it's really good. That's why that Jaipur has taken this heritage area for smart city development, because it's really caring for its heritage. But this trend of caring for the heritage really started long time back. I will quickly introduce you first to the planning of Jaipur. It was, even when Sir Y.J. Singh was deciding on his new capital, they were moving, from the earlier capital of Amer, because it was getting congested. It was a hilly capital which would not allow further expansion. And it was at the time of 18th century when Sir Y.J. Singh had very cordial relations with the Mughals. They were serving as commanders to the Mughals and fighting for them. So he envisioned this city, which is more of a trade and commerce city, completely on the plain. So you can see, Amer was right up on the hill, but this was a spot he decided, where you see the water body in the center, the lake Talkatora was there, and one of the first buildings to be built here was, the temple of Govind Dev Ji and the astronomical site of Jantar Mantar Observatory. And these sort of determined the center of Jaipur. These were, of course, aligned with, if you see how they are aligned with the hills in the surrounding. So the center of the city actually aligns with Ganeshkar, the top of the hill at the back, whereas the main axis, which actually, defines the Badi Chopper or the main square, was aligned with Jaigarh, the previous, fort next to Amer. It was used for defense of Amer and later also for Jaipur, and Shankargarh in front here, the Moti Dungri area. And the east-west axis was aligned at a specific inclination, the same as the sundial of Jantar Mantar, and that's how you can see the grid developing, the Badi Chopper, and then at equal distance you have the Choti Chopper coming, and finally the Prastara plan, which is so much talked about for Jaipur. So I would not get into the details of the Prastara plan. There are already enough authors and scholarship on this. What is interesting is that for authors and researchers have further found out how Jaipur worked for its defense. So you can see what you see in these circles are basically the throw of the cannon from Jaigarh. Jaigarh has the second largest cannon in Asia, and it has a throw of up to 80 kilometers. And this, you can see how the defense of Amer and these walled areas of Jaipur, the city wall itself was designed to take care of this defense. So basically the hills that you see in the background, the fortifications that existed earlier, and the new city wall together worked on the defense of Jaipur, though it really did not need much of defense, because at the time it was envisaged it was purely a trade and commerce city. But of course, what is most unique and interesting about Jaipur is the city plan proportions, which are derived again from the Jantar Mantar astronomical instruments. The sundial, the angle of the sundial, 23 degrees is what aligns with the rest of the road network. So the city plan proportions are derived from astronomical instruments, and also the width of the streets is related to that extra savai, extra quarter, and their specific proportions. So it's a very well designed, well planned city. Jai Singh studied a number of historic city plans across the world. His library was full of these plans, which were brought in from America, from other places in the world, and even the Vastu Shastra itself he studied in detail to really come at this particular plan, along with his advisor and architect Vidyadhar. And this is an 18th century plan of Jaipur, which is from the Kapardwara collection. So it shows how Jaipur was finally planned. Of course, I'm not getting into more historical plans, but there are several construction drawings kind of plan which sort of show how Jaipur was being built, how these Chowkris were first constructed, the one from the west side, and it's one of the cities which was built on a project mode. This is also recognized by UNESCO in its World Heritage inscription, that it was one city planned and finished in a limited time with a very project oriented mode. So it's a very good example of a design city of 18th century. In terms of planning and projects, I will start from 2006 onward, which has been my association with Jaipur itself, when it was also, heritage management plan for the city was made. It was the first city in India to actually prepare a city level heritage management plan, and that was in 2006-07. when 1096 listed structures were inventoried here. It also shows, like on the left side you can see in terms of planning from 2006 to 2020 what has been happening. There have been architectural control guidelines initiated in 2009-10. The heritage management plan was finally included in Jaipur master plan in 2013, and that's the Jaipur master plan of 2020 till 2025. And then, of course, in the smart city plan, walled city heritage management. What is important to note is that heritage has been a very important segment for Jaipur, and it's there everywhere in the planning, whether it's at master plan level or the smart city plan or any other activity. Simultaneously, they have been very active in taking up conservation projects, and that again the process started in 2006-7 as a major conservation project of Amer Fort was taken up, that really set on the use of traditional techniques, traditional materials, training of the masons. And then you have, subsequently projects taken up throughout the conservation of Jaipur Bazaars, the Ghat Ki Guni, Jantar Mantar, and other areas, and including the heritage walk that were taken up. And parallel to that, it has also been moving forward with certain UNESCO inscriptions. You have Jantar Mantar, which was the first World Heritage Site, state protected archaeology site in India, to be inscribed in 2010. Amer Fort, which was in the Amer town, it was part of 6 serial hill forts of Rajasthan nomination. And then, of course, for Jaipur, rather than moving forward with the inscription of World Heritage Site, though it was on tentative list, it was preferred that we first go for the UNESCO Creative City nomination, which is actually a network to promote the crafts and art of Jaipur. So this was a deliberate decision, and further to that, it was proposed for inscription and in 2018 and inscribed in 2019. So I'll just quickly go over the whole sequence. In 2006, there was a need felt for a Jaipur Heritage Management Plan by Jaipur Municipal Corporation, and a special committee was created, the Jaipur Heritage Committee, which looked into creating this plan. And because, the economy of Jaipur relies on heritage tourism as well as culture and creative industries, and at least 30% of these creative industries were in the walled city. So it was really, decided that a heritage management plan will be prepared, and we were part of, the team that prepared the whole plan. It was linked to the master plan of Jaipur. So basically, it had to look at the city core or the walled city area, but also outside the walled city area, whatever other heritage sites like Ghat Ki Guni, Amer Fort, or others in the surroundings were there. They were also part of the inventory. This shows the listing under Heritage Management Plan, and this, as I said, it became part of the Jaipur Master Plan 2025, and it was recognized as best practice by NIUA in 2015. But here you can see, similar to what Ashish was showing for Ahmedabad, we had Ford Foundation listing that was done in the 1970s, which showed around 289 historic structures. But when in 2006-7, when we did the listing again, we realized that about 50 or 60 of those structures had already gone. So every time when we go through a new listing, one realizes that that there are certain heritage structures getting lost. And in 2006-7, when we completed this, we had about 1,096 structures. Now we have identified about 1,500 structures which are being inventoried by INTAC as part of the process. Once this heritage management plan was completed, there was prioritization and implementation of conservation projects, which was, I showed you in the second column, how these projects were taken up. This, of course, is outside the World Heritage property, but it acted as a catalyst conservation projects for urban renewal, which was later on then taken up for the Jaipur walled city. So this is on the outskirts, it has 52 properties in a valley, and a very interesting project. Like I said, these are the kind of conservation projects at urban level that act as catalysts to promote our traditional craftsmanship, traditional materials and techniques, for which Rajasthan, of course, now is one of the leading states. And these projects in Jaipur were the first precursors that took that forward. This project also had a challenge of relocating a major highway, because this highway was going up from the top in this 2.5 kilometer stretch of Ghat Ki Guni and damaging the 52 heritage structures, because you had these trucks, moving around. So this was a major infrastructure project simultaneously realized and implemented in 2010, where you had the diversion to the highway so that you could actually protect these structures and retain this particular Hatkiguni street as part of a heritage tourism development plan. And this was completely, like I said, this was one of the first facade conservation project that acted as a catalyst, which was later on, taken up in a similar manner for the Jaipur Bazaars. And even heritage walks are now started here since 2014, and is now listed walk with Sahapedia. Similarly, inside the walled city of Jaipur, like Chowkri Modikhana Heritage Walk, which is one of the old chowkris inside, with the traders living in the area. It was initiated in 2003 by Jaipur Virasat Foundation and Intact, two NGOs, and it became one of the driving forces that led to improvement of the Thatero Ka Rasta later, till 2014-15, till this got implemented. This was, taken up in detail, mapping the streets in the walk area. You can see each street has its own character. The building condition assessment of 106 buildings, what is the state of conservation, what date they are from, and how to upgrade them. And also the social surveys of each property in the walk, which owner owns how many vehicles, how do they get in, what is their income, and if they want to get involved in the walk. This was a participatory walk design. So what would they want their house, to be involved in? Some of them wanted it to be like a museum visit for people to see, some of the artifacts that they had. Some of them wanted to offer refreshments like sharbat and all to get the traditional cuisine into the walk experience. So this walk was designed involving the people in Chowkri Modikhana, and also even looking at, whether there could be a bed and breakfast stay. Like some people wanted this old room of theirs to be converted like a paying guest accommodation. So these kind of proposals were developed. And there was even involvement of institutions, like in this case, Oxford Brook Study. The students of urban planning did this project with us, where we gave them the drawings and they actually designed a proposal for the Mahavir Chowk in Chowkri Modikhana. And this is not the only institutional collaborative exercise that we did for Jaipur. I mean, it's also a part of our practice, to incorporate, involve institutions and students throughout. So there are several examples like this. I'm especially mentioning this because I think there was a question framed by one of the participants, how does one foresee the role of institutions? So definitely, I think for practitioners, it is just, the project remains incomplete unless you have active involvement of institutions, because it adds a lot of value, especially in terms of urban conservation and participatory approach. So these proposals then we finally put, together for the community. So you can see these Chowkri people actually commenting on this. And then there were people from other chowkris who came and said, oh, why can't we do it in our chowkri, and can you organize something like this? But this is something very key to urban conservation, because the community itself has many voices, and to address all these voices, especially in case of a city like Jaipur with so much population, becomes a challenge. Jantar Mantar in 2010 was taken up as the first World Heritage Site, and its management plan was implemented, in between 2011 and 2015. It did not have earlier the interpretation centers. These very important documents of Savai Jai Singh, how he studied astronomy, these were all lying locked. So this building was actually restored, and this display was prepared. And even in terms of any new things, like you have stone signages using the local craftsmanship, that is a tradition that continues in Jaipur, even in new sites and their conservation. A buffer zone proposal was prepared, because of course the property of Jantar Mantar had its own buffer zone, and that's the time one also started looking at urban conservation, because the buffer zone included the Tripolia Bazaar and part of the Sire Deori Bazaar. So looking at the Jaipur Bazaars, its historic layering was done, and you can see this historic layering. So it was, the first layer was 18th century, which is the time of Savai Jai Singh II, and you can see the particular style of Rajput Mughal architecture, blended very well. And then you have the second phase, which is around the mid 19th century, and that's Savai Ram Singh, and he is the one who took had influences from the British period. So you can see, like colonial arches and those kind of sort of Indo-Saracenic features adding in these buildings in green that you see. And the last layer, of course, is the 20th century layer, early 20th century, by Mirza Ismail, who was the main advisor to the rulers of Jaipur at that time. And you can see the facades, the shopping facades of Jaipur that came up. That is the last layer, and also has Art Deco features like the Golcha Cinema Hall and other buildings. So it was important to understand these historic layers, because if you're going to conserve the buildings, then you need to know which one belongs to which period, and that's the kind of intervention you are supposed to take forward. So based on this, even for the people of Jaipur to know, there was a facade control, booklet designed based on these historic styles. So they know what style their window is, or if this is the British influence, this is the Art Deco period that you see, and that's how they would use the material or the technique or even the style to conserve it properly. And these urban conservation of bazaars was taken up in between 2011 to 2013. It was also awarded by HUDCO. It was one of the first facade conservation projects where government money was put into conservation of, or facade conservation of, the private buildings. And this served as a very good model, because later on, when government also floated the Hriday scheme for 12 cities, their first question was, when we proposed heritage walks, they said, why should we spend money on public buildings facade conservation? And then they looked at the Jaipur case, and they had supported it during NURM. So it was taken as an example, and then all the facade conservation of various bazaars was approved on that basis. So these are examples of the facade conservation. Three bazaars were conserved in 2013-14, and now further 9 bazaars have been conserved in the last 3 years under the Smart City Plan. So these are views showing, the condition assessment and the before-after of facades. And then, of course, 2015 onwards, the main components, in this case, even the Jantar Mantar Heritage Management Plan for the buffer zone was funneled into the Smart City Plan. So like the proposal for Global Arts Square, or even the previous, DPRs or planning aspects were sort of interweaved with the Smart City Plan, so that it's not like two different things functioning in the city. At the same time, like I said, the creative city of crafts and folk art was a very important designation for Jaipur, because it's not the tangible heritage, built heritage. There was enough conservation works happening. There was enough promotion of the traditional crafts. But then you also had Jaipur designed as a city of crafts by Savai Jai Singh. He was a great visionary. I mean, it's trade, commerce, but it's also crafts. And this is what, one looked at. Even in the 18th century, he really felt that craftspeople need to be promoted. It was the 36 Karkhanas that were started with the planning of the city, and the royal family sustained this patronage for a long time, because even these are the 36 Karkhanas mapped. So there are some Karkhanas like Tatar Khana or Modikhana or Imarat Khana, which were like the building or the water heating departments within the palaces, which are no longer there. But then there are others like the paintings one with Surat Khana, or the one with the goti and zari that still continue as traditional crafts. So this is what was mapped even in the creative city, and now as criteria 6 for World Heritage. And this somehow continued, which is really good for Jaipur, because even in the 19th century, when I mentioned the British period, the Indo-Saracenic buildings, which very well, like this Albert Hall, incorporated the traditional craftsmanship, but this was also a museum of crafts that they built, the building itself. So the British period also promoted crafts, though in a very different manner than what it was earlier. And even in the 20th century, now we see, 21st century, like we have the Jawar Kala Kendra, but still you have a fusion where the artists and craftsmen get an opportunity to work with designers, Institute of Crafts and Design or NIT people, and really develop the crafts further. And that was the intention of UNESCO Creative City of Crafts and Folk Art. This is a mapping of the location of the crafts clusters, both inside the walled city and outside, and the major crafts that are still sustained in the city of Jaipur. And of course, these crafts or intangible have to be interlinked with development. So that is one of the main criteria. Integration of crafts with development plans. It has to be part of the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals and Master Plan for Jaipur. And that's the reason, even in case of World Heritage designation, we were very keen that it goes for criteria 6. These are sample formats which were used for mapping the craftspeople, the craft itself, the craftsmen that were mapped, and each craft, I'm not going to show you all the details, but we have these details where, like something like Meenakari, where the craftsmen actually moved from Amer, and before that the family had shifted from Pakistan area, and their origin and evolution, the material and process, which was really time consuming because craftspeople are not ready to share this knowledge. It is really, they really train only their family with this. So it took a lot of time, but we have all the crafts that I've shown you, all of them documented in this process, which was part of Creative Cities. And at the same time, building crafts, which, Jaipur is so rich in, whether it's stone crafts, the lime crafts, the frescoes or the murals and the mirror work. So it has, all these, spread across the city in its various havelis, palaces, and public buildings. And the idea was also to have crafts walk linked with built heritage. So this is like the Chowkri Modikhana walk that extended. It's one of the walks during World Tourism Day on October 2016, where you see them looking at the havelis in this area, but also talking to the Lak Bangle maker Awaz Muhammad, who's one of the master craftsperson here. And he actually made, the first letter of first alphabet of each participatory, each person participating in the walk, with Lak, and gave it to them. And this was, of course, direct earning for him. It's just like 40-50 rupees, but there is direct link to the economy. The World Tourism Day, again, this ended in Jantar Mantar, which is a World Heritage Site. And here you see, one of our visually impaired interns who's actually showing the site around to these differently abled students. So it's basically being inclusive, of all people, whether it's the crafts people here or whether it is, regarding to universal access, we were trying to address all. The crafts workshops for a week, continue on World Heritage Day, and this is Jaipur Municipal Corporation supporting. There are institutions like IOGEN, INTAC, and other colleges of architecture, other institutions who get involved. So, like I said, that it has to be participatory and linked between NGOs as well as the government together, because that's the only way to look at urban heritage. Coming to the World Heritage nomination itself, it was a long process. It was on the tentative list in 2015, but rather than putting the dossier together for World Heritage, we preferred first to go for the World Creative City inscription, and then it was submitted, in 2018 in the nomination dossier, and finally got inscribed. It's a 1.5-year cycle. So July 2019 is when it got inscribed as a World Heritage City. And currently Jaipur has to prepare the Special Area Heritage Plan as part of its commitment to the World Heritage Committee, which is similar to the development plan that Ashish mentioned for Ahmedabad, but there is a deadline of December 2020, which probably now will get a bit postponed because of the COVID situation. This is an image of the nominated property. So you can see the walled city completely as a nominated property, and the buffer zone in blue, which shows the buffer zone. We wanted to incorporate all that was essential for the Jaipur city planning. So the hills that I was showing you earlier, which mark the axis of Jaipur plan, which is the outstanding value, had to be incorporated in the buffer zone. And that's what you see, right till Moti Dungri Hill out here, and the Hatroi Hill and Galtaji out here. All these are part of buffer zone, including Amer at the back. In the final report, ICOMOS, considered that criteria 2 definitely is important for Jaipur, and you can see from the aerial view, it manifests an interchange of ancient Hindu, Mughal, and Western ideas in the urban form and architecture. So that is one criteria that is recognized. They also propose criteria 4 for Jaipur as an outstanding example of an architectural ensemble with city planning and an urban form reflecting ancient and modern influences to produce a commercial city unparalleled in scale and magnificence in the period. So this is a criteria, 2 is there for the architectural, amalgamation of various architectural styles and iconic monuments, whereas criteria 4 is largely for the town planning, where the attributes are the grid iron plan inspired by the Prastara, the chalks, the square chalks, choppers, and the city gates, and those are the attributes which define Jaipur. Jantar Mantar, of course, now this is a World Heritage Site within the World Heritage Site of Jaipur city, so it's doubly inscribed. Hawa Mahal, Palace of Winds, and other iconic buildings, besides, of course, the bazaars, the living bazaars of the Pink City itself, and the city gates, which are intact and well conserved. ICOMOS, like what Ashish had said, also had concerns about accepting criteria 6, though it was already there as UNESCO network of creative cities. Yet we felt that it is important to get criteria 6, into the World Heritage Planning, because then you are sure that it is under protection and there is no, segregation between built as and intangible heritage. So this is something that we had to convince, and finally it got accepted. It was quite challenging, but this is one aspect that we were very concerned about, that criteria 6 definitely for Jaipur has to be there, because Savai Jai Singh, he was a great planner, he was a visionary, and he designed Jaipur in a superb manner, but then his vision was also to promote the trade and crafts, so that also had to be in. And there were certain concerns of ICOMOS, which was on the condition of the city wall, on the condition of the encroachments in Jaipur. And these are management challenges that we are still working on. So some of the gates are in very good condition, like you can see in this aerial view. But finally, with certain terms and conditions, Jaipur was inscribed, by UNESCO as stated by them as an expression of the astronomical skills, living traditions, unique urban form, and exemplary innovative city planning of an 18th century city from India. And this, of course, is the 38th UNESCO World Heritage Site, the last one inscribed in 2019. We were fortunate to have the DG UNESCO herself visit Jaipur in February 2020 to give the certificate. And currently the commitments, that Jaipur is still working on, they have to develop a special area heritage plan. So the work on the plan is initiated. There is involvement of UNESCO, New Delhi, technical experts in this. There is an inventory of heritage buildings that is required, which is commissioned to intact. A structure, management structure, like what Ashish was showing, we had to also create one for Jaipur World Heritage. And it is at 3 levels. We have the state level heritage committee with the chief secretary, overseeing the committee, where you have everybody like the smart city, tourism, and all other departments coming in, because any project that happens, even metro, any project that happens in the walled city area has to be now monitored as per the UNESCO World Heritage Committee guidelines. At second level, we have the Technical Heritage Committee, which is chaired by the Chief Town Planner, Mr. Vijay Varghia at the moment. And this technical committee really evaluates any projects that are submitted for the Jaipur walled city. So the technical committee looks at whether there is any heritage impact, whether they should be taken, whether there should be any changes. And it sends back to the agency, which could be Smart City or whichever body that is taking up the project. And lastly, at the lowest level, but the most important, is the Jaipur Heritage Cell, and it has recently engaged 2 conservation architects full-time, which is assigned to look at the daily requirements within the walled city of the locals, the approval of the heritage structure plans, any changes in that, and also developing the special architectural control guidelines further. One of the other concerns of ICOMOS was also the heritage impact assessment that is essential for the smart city projects to be taken up. So those are also commissioned and to different consultants and are in progress. And preparing a detailed monitoring plan, which is now part of the special area heritage plan. Of course, now with the additional issue of pandemic planning, the post-pandemic situation, it needs to be incorporated in the special area heritage plan 2020. And I end my presentation with this slide where you can see, the attribute like the city gate, which is one of the values, added as part of the World Heritage, actually in this case becomes a point of control and an operational element even for post-pandemic planning. So it's become like a control point. So that's what the site managers really need to look at, which are the values that can actually have multiple roles and used in post-pandemic planning, while also taking care that the heritage is not impacted. But I'm ending again with the archival picture. When we look back at this 18th century, and I would close with one of the queries that Mr. Vijayvargiya raised, saying that how do we ensure economy continues in Jaipur and there is less density here, and how do we manage the post-pandemic situation, because this is a city with 400,000 people now in 2 square kilometer of area, which was initially designed only for 50,000 people. So I would say this archival image is sort of an indication, the pandemic is sort of an indication that we now need to get back to looking at mobility, pedestrianization, and more earlier traditional ways of living that needs to be now incorporated in the post-pandemic planning also. Of course, the other point is that one is using advanced technology like drones, which are being used very well for the monitoring of lockdown in case of Jaipur. It is an epicenter, and they have about 15 drones and 800 cameras in this 2 square kilometer of area. So it's really, how you use the technology. At the same time, these drones are also making, videos for raising awareness of people on how beautiful the city looks in lockdown and how we can maintain it in this manner. So thank you. That is the end of my presentation. And let me see if I can get back to
such
share.
A wonderful presentation.
Sure.
Yeah. To sum up, I'll just say that you have explained the evolution and growth of Jaipur city, historic city, as first planned city of India of 18th century. Then how UNESCO has emphasized on city project oriented mode for Jaipur city. Then you have explained chronologically about Jaipur planning projects. Sorry. Then, as you rightly said, that heritage is very important segment at all levels in Jaipur. And you explained about the importance of conservation projects. Then there are lots of sites by UNESCO in walled city of Jaipur. Then you also emphasized on creative city in 2015 to promote art and crafts of Jaipur city, which started in 2006. And then there was a need of Jaipur heritage management plan, that with the master plan of Jaipur. You have also emphasized on best practices by listing under heritage management plan of Jaipur, like Ghat Ki Guni project. Then heritage walks are important, then how mapping streets, then building condition assessment and social surveys. And I think through this, you have rightly pointed out or explained that how community participation is also important in heritage management plan. Then, as you said rightly, institutional collaboration will add a value to heritage management plan. Yes, of course, I think all the stakeholders needs to come together, that is government, NGO, then institutions and the community. Then we can have a better management plan. Then you also explained about proposals of signages and interpretation centers, then historic layers, layering of bazaars, then blending of Rajput and different styles of architecture actually. Then facade control project, first time recognized by the government, and how it is taken by the government and provided to be a very good model for others. Then you have expressed that heritage management plan also blended with the smart city plan. It is not in isolation. So this there is a inclusion of this heritage management plan at all levels. Then again, you said that as Jaipur is a city of craft and folk art, so evolving identity of Jaipur, then fusion of artists and craftsmen, how it is important and how it is addressing the SDG goals also. Then you have, I think, shown us how you have mapped the crafts, then craft walks with built heritage. Then you have rightly said that there has to be a universal access for inclusive planning and process of. Then you explained about the process of World Heritage City. What are the criterias and how Jaipur has been nominated as the World Heritage City and why it is outstanding example because of certain reasons. Like you mentioned 4 reasons, because it is based on the traditional wisdom, like ancient plan, like Prastara. That was one of the reasons. Then, as you rightly said, the city planning and urban form of Jaipur is based on Prastara. Then, long-standing arts and crafts tradition. That city as a center of artistic excellence, as envisaged by our Savai Mansingh. Then, World Heritage. You explained about World Heritage committees, how it is functioning, what are the different projects, and I think at the end you have also explained that how we can take care of values for this post-pandemic planning, like mobility and pedestrians, and because the city was designed for, as you said, that for the 50,000 population, and now it is much more. So still it is catering to the needs of today. So we have to again go to the traditional techniques like mobility and pedestrian. So thank you for such wonderful presentation. And now I think we will take the question answers and questions from our participants. I request Neha to read the questions, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Indeed, both the presentations were so good that it has kept all of us glued by the end. So I think now it's time for questions. I would also like to thank the participants that while registering, they've already posed so many interesting questions, and it has helped us and our speakers to incorporate most of them into their presentations. Thank you to the speakers for that. We can still take some questions that the participants had posed. Some of the questions that were not covered during the presentations. So the first question is how one looks at the contemporary architecture and crafts as compared to the rich legacy of both Jaipur and Ahmedabad.
Shikhaji, are you?
Well, I think I sort of answered it when I was saying how NID and Jawahar Kala Kendra, are looking at contemporary. Yeah, it's both an example of contemporary architecture and also contemporary craft, but with inclusion of the traditional. So Jaipur already has some examples. Maybe Kashmir you can respond.
True. I think even Ahmedabad, the new building regulations, which is like since 2002 onwards, the new regulations looks at the typology of construction in the walled city specifically. Of course, it does not go beyond and prescribe certain characters and elements, as Jaipur has done very interestingly the kind of typological understanding of what kind of windows, what kind of doors, and architectural features. That is left to the freedom of choice to a person, except for listed heritage buildings and adjoining structures. So the vistas in areas which are defined and regulated by the Heritage Conservation Committee, this is left open, but within the planning constraints which were given. So this has to fit into the Ahmedabad World City module in terms of planning, which has been identified. But beyond that, I think Ahmedabad is open to experiments with contemporary architecture as well, even the World City area. whenever there is a direct impact, the Heritage Conservation Committee may intervene and say there are certain kind of aluminum composite bonds will not be allowed, or certain kind of color schemes or materials which will be prescribed or not included. This is the case of Ahmedabad.
Okay. Can we take the second question now?
Yes.
Okay. Then the other question is, did the presence of outstanding universal value, the criteria 6 in the UNESCO World Heritage Dossier of Jaipur, gave advantage in the protection of intangible heritage in the city as compared to the absence of OUVs, the criteria 6 in the case of Ahmedabad? So how is the tangible heritage of historic core of Ahmedabad being protected and managed?
So I guess Shikhaji very well explained the importance of criteria 6. It is not that Ahmedabad did not have criteria 6. We already had described in the nomination dossier, and since 2011, when we had first the tentative nomination, we have been ascribing. But there is a difference in context. Here it is not really about only the crafts practices. The criteria 6 in Ahmedabad's case, if you look, it is more about the businesses and business people, communities which took the city to a next level. Just to compare the present situation, I was looking at one of the archives of 1918 Spanish flu. The local Mahajans, which were like tradesmen society, they collected a lot of funds. They actually supported the local, not only the local pandemic situation, but also the villages in surrounding. So there was this local intangible aspect which we had prescribed in the dossier. Then there was the contribution of Ahmedabad for the freedom fight, the national freedom fight, Gandhiji's association here, establishment of Sabarmati Ashram, Sardar Patel's contribution. These are all criteria 6 aspects for Ahmedabad's case. But unfortunately, what happened is in the World Heritage Committee discussion, many other members did not felt that Ahmedabad may be qualifying for criteria 6. So the dossier identifies, but UNESCO committee did not approve of criteria 6 in case of Ahmedabad. So 2 and 5 were approved, but not number 6.
Then we have another question. In your opinion, what would be the role of architectural education institutions in management of historic cities?
So again, Neha, I think I have already answered this. Is probably Dr. Madhura would take it up. Like I already mentioned, the collaborations that are possible and should be done.
Yes, I think, yeah. Dr. Shikha has already answered this question in her presentation, and I feel strongly that as an institution, we have human resource with us, then we have research labs with us, then we are in the city itself, so we can spend a lot of time for doing surveys and whatever information and analysis is needed for that. And until and unless we come together as educational institutions, then NGO, government and community. So there is a need of, this is a role of educational institution for heritage management plan. And there are provisions in universities and educational institutions that you can have that memorandum of understanding with NGOs and we can work in an efficient manner.
It's very interesting. Even Ahmedabad, I think I can, if I start listing, there are so many institutions working here, but NID, SEPT University, planning institutions like Nirma, Anand, these are all coming in. Right now, we are in the process of documenting whatever 2,000 plus buildings that we have. So, a number of institutions are working with us. We are working with NID on visual improvement. The Jaipur had already done very interesting urban facade restoration work. So we are right now working with NID on a very interesting research project on visual language of city. So institution does play a very, very important role. It is not only about administration and people, also about a multidisciplinary approach. And institutions are very, very important part.
And what I feel, I think all the institutions, we have electives, we have dissertation, we have research projects. So we can give this live project to our students and that will be a better output with the help of NGO and the government.
The participant wants to know whether identifying urban issues beyond those that a planning or urban design studio would do in terms of heritage conservation.
Yes. I think, I mean, of course, as the introduction itself, these are cities. These are not sites. These are not just one building or one particular precinct. These are entire cities, and there are so many aspects. So health is one important aspect that we are in the process of actually relooking in the entire urban management and health. The old cities, the congested areas which are not designed for. I'm talking about 15th century city in Ahmedabad, which was not designed for any mobility and transportation. The vehicles that we have, the parking requirements that we have. So that's where I think the entire urban management will have to look at very differently. So that's why we said we will do a local area plan with conservation in mind. So conservation becomes the center, and then a local area plan which is as local as a pole level, as a neighborhood level planning, and to address certain kind of issues which can be addressed in terms of quality of life, not only conservation for heritage.
Thank you. Then another question we have, for cities like Ahmedabad where the heritage area is already facing gentrification, and for Jaipur where the heritage precinct is expected to get gentrification due to migration of the host community due to commercialization and foreign trades. So these cities either have socio-economic implications or likely to have these impacts. So how are we going to manage the privately owned historic structures in such heritage cores where the residents are of low income group and they also cannot afford the high cost of preservation with no benefits, and also the residents who are unaware of managing the heritage assets?
So I just want to clarify this, for Jaipur, it is generally the impression that is only, the city is functioning largely because of tourism and gentrification will happen. But we did a very detailed social survey of the shopkeepers and the residents of Jaipur, and the survey results were really, quite surprising for us because they clearly stated that they don't associate with tourism as an economy. Their economy is largely dependent on local buying, like the Pretoria Bazaar utensils are bought by the local people of Jaipur. So Jaipur, in case of Jaipur, I don't see any risk of gentrification. Even if you compare it to other Rajasthan cities, the Jaipur walled city doesn't have heritage hotels inside the walled city area. You don't have that people buying Havelis and converting into hotels and other people moving out. Whoever is also, if they are making changes, it's the owners themselves. So in our survey, we found that gentrification is not a risk definitely in case of Jaipur, and I don't see that as a risk. But the issue here, of course, is making the owners more aware of traditional conservation and why it is important for them now being part of World Heritage. So this is something like raising awareness, and in fact when it got inscribed, I got phone calls from some owners saying, thank you, we got our city inscribed. So that kind of sense of ownership and protection and saying, oh, this is a value, this is World Heritage, I need to keep it like that. That we need to, generate among people, whether whatever class they are, So that is what is essential.
That's true. Even for Ahmedabad, I mean, gentrification is not really happening. If I would say that there is a change in transformation in community structure that we have. I mean, traditionally these were all neighborhoods owned and resided by homogeneous communities, which is like now mixed up communities, which is fine. I think that's not gentrification. There are a few owners who would actually go for heritage homestays because now the policies support them. But that's like very handful in terms of numbers. Some age heritage homestays or hotels which are functioning right now in the world city, not really a significant number to qualify as gentrification. In the past, if you see the 20 years back, 10 years back, there was de-gentrification happening. So most of the people who are well off transferring out of the world city, which was the trend seen, and which is where the degeneration started and people started losing the interest. And the building craftsmanship also, which was thriving in the city, now have more become like export houses for carved wooden elements, but not really looking at the building crafts. So these are the kind of things that has happened in the past, and as I mentioned, we did the diagnosis study for crafts which were there to revive. But I think not really to an issue of rather the gentrification or degentrification in Ahmedabad as well.
I have one question from Shikha. Shikha, I just want to know what are the issues involved in maintenance of heritage buildings during current pandemic, and what actions needs to be taken by the government so as to protect these buildings during this pandemic, which will last for another few months.
So I think, in fact, there was an earlier webinar where we were actually addressing World Heritage Site and pandemic, how to monitor. And that's why I showed the example of how your city gate is actually a very important feature, but it is being protected, it is actually being used during the pandemic. So there are certain elements like that which will be used, but then otherwise we need to have a small monitoring team in place, like the heritage cell of Jaipur Municipal Corporation should have a small monitoring team for inspecting these heritage areas and to ensure that it is being protected. There is a checklist which is prepared by ICROM, the international body, and that is very useful in monitoring whatever is heritage is of value, even in the pandemic situation.
Then we have one more, Mr.
Thank you.
Pankaj Wadhwa. Maybe we can take just one more question.
Thank you, and great presentation. Just wanted to know how are you taking care of fire in these walled city areas and water conservation, and what about solid the sewerage management, solid waste management? What are you doing about it? Because most of these walled cities are pretty dirty at many corners and all. I hope with the smart city projects and all, and the water conservation is a very big issue, and safety, because fire brigades and all cannot enter these areas. So how you are taking care of that?
So this is, when we are talking about the development plan, when I say special area heritage plan, it's going to have several secondary plans, which would include a disaster risk reduction plan by, special experts. It will include all these services plan, which will look at the traditional systems and then what new ones, advanced ones to be incorporated. So basically, all aspects that you are mentioning, it could be traffic, tourism, interpretation, services, and disaster risk reduction, and all such plans would be then together forming the special area plan. We've already done that in case of Jantar Mantar Jaipur, where you can see all those plans in place. And for Jaipur, it is in process, and it will take a total of 1 to 1.5 years to develop all these plans. But that's definitely, all these aspects have to be taken care of.
Well, I think similarly in Ahmedabad, we had, of course, we are working on the infrastructure planning as part of this local area plan. But we had fire hydrants and the pipelines which were laid because the large tanks cannot enter. But what they do is they take the main tanker to the main road, and then there is the underground pipes which are connected to insides of the pole. And there you get your local hose. So there was some system which was functioning earlier. This was, I'm saying, mid 20th century. We had installed this kind of systems for fire safety because wooden architecture is much more in Ahmedabad. And we are looking at reviving some of them also. But in addition to that, we have got two-wheeler fire hydrants, so which are specially designed, very small size fire hydrants which have got high mist and high pressure, high mist kind of throws, so which does not need too much of a volume of water. And we are also looking at the other technologies which can support, like drone, or if you could have seen some of the pictures that Ahmedabad was posting through different media. So there are very case-specific tailor-made solutions which are to be found. In terms of sanitation and water supply, Ahmedabad, the walled city had a very, very interesting and detailed infrastructure laid out already in early 20th century. So this was around independence time. We already started doing the underground good drainage network and water supply network, which has got its maintenance manuals as well. So that's, I think, somehow covered. But we are looking at the upgrades. Majorly, the challenges in Ahmedabad are more related to transport.
Okay, so I think we are running short of time. So for the rest of the participants, I think the presenters have also shared their email IDs with you, and you can also mail us at the following email address for any other queries, and we can get back to you with the presenters. So now over to you, Dr. Madhura.
Yeah, I request Dr. Anuradha to give vote of thanks and sum up. Dr. Anuradha, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shikha. Thank you, Ashish, for a fantastic presentation and for taking out your time to be with us. It's sort of getting to about late evening now. I'll take up a bit more of your time with the presenter's time, and I think those two questions that were asked initially, which was that what is the role of institutions in heritage management, and Dr. Madhura gave a fantastic answer, and so did Dr. Shikhar. I just wanted to add to that is that there's a lot of benefit for students as well to start to study historic architecture as architecture rather than historic architecture, because a lot of times students study historic architecture and say, it can't happen anymore. So I think it's actually really important that they understand climatology, because there's so much that we teach in our curriculum. As an educator, I can tell you that there's so much that they learn is theoretical. And if you happen to be in these living cities like Ahmedabad or Jaipur, there's no better place to go and learn this than the buildings itself, the sites themselves. So whether you're looking at climatology or building materials and construction or site planning or services, you really need to understand the logic and the basic concept rather than just replicating what is being done in the 20th century. So there's a lot of value in that. So it's not just I definitely think institutions should take a leading role in creating archives and labs, for being sort of assisting people in being custodians of heritage. But there's also a lot of value in students looking at and studying architecture as architecture in a historic context rather than as historic buildings, which removes it, which makes this whole thing kind of seem very irrelevant to them, that it is no longer relevant. So I think that's something we really need to emphasize as educators. And the second point I wanted to make about contemporary architecture is, Ashish, you talked about the development controls. I think that's good, but it's probably not enough. And I think we would demand contemporary practices, practicing out of historic cities, to respond not in a historicist or a stylistic way, but in a way that represents the spirit of the place. So no copying. You suddenly don't want to see this kind of copying, copyist, mimicry of historic styles. But I'm just remembering the kind of architecture that you see in Venice, for instance, a work of Carlos Capa, who is so aware of the fact that Venice is a lagoon, it's a watery city. His architecture, the use of materials, the kind of spaces, the space planning is so responsive to that. And so I think in today's day and age, we want intelligent and clever responses, definitely going beyond, taking into account the development control, suggested guidelines, but definitely going beyond and paying a homage, kind of an ode to the historic cities and the historic fabric that is there. So in closing, thank you very much for providing us a fantastic space and a fantastic substance to this debate, and and I thank you on behalf of Manipal University Jaipur and the Faculty of Design as a new dean of Faculty of Design, and for Dr. Madhura for asking me to give the vote of thanks. So thank you very much, and thank you to the participants as well for really brilliant questions. I think that makes a panel discussion much more interesting. So thank you everyone for your time. See you soon.
Thank you so much. I'm signing off.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes.